Okay, we're recording. Everything's up. Okay, good. So a couple things real fast. First off, I'm going to make a reading assignment. Oh, I didn't put it up on the board. Let me put it on the board. So we went back in time a little bit because that's what I do. The drama. $351 to $379. $351 to $379. And that one should be due on Thursday. I might give you one more day tomorrow. Please check online. My plan is to just have a regular class, but in case I don't sleep, which is a very good possibility, we might do something else. So just check, and if we do it, it'll be, I got a couple different documentaries I will show. So I'll put one of those up. And if that happens, then I'll put there'll be a worksheet that goes along with it. I'll sign it. And I'll give you a time period to watch it. And by the way, how many electors does each state have? The Electoral College? You have been told this. Let's see if we remember.
It's like presently, or
How they come up with the number of electors for each state?
so population.
Yes, a little bit.
Is it?
Time to know stuff.
Is it?
It does depend a little bit on the population.
Is it based off how many senators or whatever?
A little bit. Partially senators, partially population. What branch of government is based on population? What branch of the Congress is based on population? So the number of members of the House and the number of members of the Senate. How many does Montana have?
One, isn't it?
One member of the House. How many senators? So we have three. Three electors. Two members of the Senate. No, you have a lot of things going on, but these, this is actually the time to know these things. And the election is coming. Montana has three. By the way, just so you remember, who's favored in the Electoral College? Big states or small states?
Small states.
Yeah, small states are really overrepresented. It's not even close. And you'll see all these maps. There's going to be a very good chance. Here's 538, a pretty good poll. And I'll put this up there just so you can see it. Yeah, they've been fairly accurate. A guy named Dave Wasserman is probably the most accurate one. He has it a little bit more, but this shows each state. This is their prediction by polls, like Montana. Probably 82. They predict 82% Trump will win. I'm guessing there's no way Trump won't win, but it could be fairly close. And then Texas is actually going to be relatively close, and that's how they go.
Florida's, I can't see Florida being in Biden's favor.
8 years ago, they voted for Obama pretty overwhelmingly, but yeah. Florida it's pretty conservative. Unlike other places, the Hispanic population there votes very Republican there, and most places they vote like here, they're both Democratic. Here it's because of the Cuban influence. So it's going to be up for grabs.
Did you show the 2016 one too? Just to kind of like see a difference on the website?
I don't know if I have it here, but I can show you real quick. And the big thing is, even though small states are favored, you just look at the states that Biden is going to win for sure, along the coast, and these is a lot of electoral votes. If Pennsylvania is probably the key. If Biden wins Pennsylvania, it's over. If Biden wins Florida, it's over. But like 29 with a lot of electoral votes. Kind of forget how big these states are. Arizona's a big state. Now, let me show you 2016 if you want to see. Clinton won by nearly 4 million popular votes, but that's what it looked like in all these states when they Clinton. So for some reason, that's not showing up.
It's way different this year.
Let's look at it.
I mean, if you look at like Florida and
But these were close.
Yeah.
These were close. Remember, it's winner take all. Whoever wins, all you have to win by is one vote, and you get all the electoral college. Remember, this was never meant to be democratic, and then in 1801 they passed the 12th Amendment, which made it pretty much undemocratic. All you have to win by is one vote. So, Clinton won here by 1.5 million votes in California. Won here by 500,000 votes.
So, but Biden's, it looks like, based on their thing, Biden's looking a little bit better in Michigan and Wisconsin, as Clinton did.
This was only 10,000 votes in Michigan.
Really?
Yeah. Pennsylvania was like 30, and this was like 20,000 votes. So if these votes would have been just a few, which is a drop in the bucket, it would have been Clinton presidency. So Trump has to really overperform, but it could happen. I could see President Trump losing by 7 or 8 million votes and becoming president, which would be unprecedented.
Didn't Clinton win by votes?
But nearly 4 million.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so it could happen. It's going to be tough though. And then we have governor's race, and this would be really big, especially we have one that's it's slight favor for Republican Gene Forte, but it's going to come down. That's what I'm waiting for. It might be 3 or 4 in the morning because they don't count. Bozeman, Billings, Great Falls. It'll be 2 or 3 in the morning for the don't count. And the Senate and the House can be raised within. This is going to be an interesting election. But if you want to know what to look for, if you happen to watch or happen to pay attention, you know pretty early. Florida looks like it's going to go for Biden. It's over. There's no way. If Florida goes to Trump, and Ohio goes to Trump, and Pennsylvania's close, it could be not only raised within, but I could see President Trump declaring victory and then chaos. Not that declaring victory means anything. I declare myself king of the world. It doesn't mean anything to elected to certify. But he's already threatened to take it to the court. So this could be really something. But don't forget, it's electoral college, and it takes days to count. They count every vote. But the Trump administration, if it looks like they're ahead, they're going to try to stop all the counting of votes and say it's over. So it's going to be, remember what I told you. There are elements that are for small d democracy and those against. Could be an interesting race. And we're coming to our idea of democracy in this unit. I mean, we're coming. It's like rolling up on us. So it's actually very much ties into many of the same arguments that were used for and against democracy in the 1830s and 40s are used today. It's unreal. History doesn't repeat itself. It echoes. See the same thing over and over again. Humans tend to be the same thing. Now, make sure in your notes, because I was reading through the essays, I'm going to take one more time to go through the grades. If I missed points for you, please let me know. Or made a mistake typing, or sometimes on those quizzes, it doesn't record what I put down. It drives me nuts, or at least I think I put down. If I made a mistake in your favor, let me know. No, I made a mistake in your favor. I guess it's like winning the lottery. But if I made a mistake hurting you, please let me know, and I'll make it. So I got to make that change. If you know anything, let me know. That includes everybody online in the television world watching me. So we got to the War of 1812. Who would be the hero of the Battle of Nolens? Andrew Jackson. And what was the battle where they destroyed the Southwestern Confederacy? The Creek. Which one? What was the battle?
Horseshoe.
Yeah, Horseshoe Bend. Horseshoe Bend and Tippecanoe. And did we get to this at all? Did we get just to the definition of nationalism?
We ended on no more Indian threat.
And then nationalism means you love your country because
It's your country.
it's your country. Patriotism is you love the country for what it stands for. That's a really different. So a patriot might say, my country is wrong. By the way, just because you love your country for what it stands for, doesn't mean you're right or more moral. It just means that's why you love your country. A lot of the Confederates said, I love my country, and it's abandoned me by potentially being against slavery, so we must destroy it. So patriotism is more complex. Nationalism is scary. I'm not a nationalist, but I am a patriot. So with that, we got Americans. So here, that's what we want. So they recognize independence. Sometimes this will be called the Second War of Independence. Didn't win the war, but because of New Orleans, we thought we won the war, and the British basically have to acknowledge the United States is here to stay. Next, the Federalist Party, because what was the convention where they threatened to leave the Union? Yeah, the Hartford Convention. That killed the Federalist Party. Killed them. Next, I told you about the roads. They couldn't get troops from most of the few American trained troops around here, Niagara. They couldn't get to Washington, D.C. or Baltimore. There are no roads. This would help trigger a transportation revolution, a slow one, but then would explode and change everything because it was linked with even a bigger revolution. This literally changed the world, the Industrial Revolution. Remember the Embargo Act and the British blockade? The Embargo Act and the British blockade kept British textiles out of the U.S. And that would trigger the first factories in the U.S., this area right here, Connecticut and Massachusetts. Fast-moving streams could turn a wheel. That's how come it started there. And so War of 1812 is one of those things. There's very interesting stories. Need a drink. By the way, Uncle Sam came from this. From the War of 1812. Sam Wilson was a quartermaster for the New York militia. And when they would send things out to the New York militia, it would be put in a property of or inspected by U.S. And they used to joke that U.S. was Uncle Sam Wilson. Quartermaster is the person in charge of supplies. And that's where Uncle Sam comes from. It's still Columbia. You can see that picture there. That's supposed to be of a U.S. sailor after the Battle of Put-in Bay. But going into the 20th century, Uncle Sam would become more of a prominent figure. Then World War I. The poster I have above, a copy of the British poster, the I Want You above the door. And that's Uncle Sam pointing. And also, you gotta sound muffled with a mask. It's amazing I take a drink and talk a little bit. I go, oh, that's what my voice sounds like. By the way, have you noticed something? How, the masks are horrible, but how you just get used to them. They still dries your throat out, and for you guys only get 2 days a week, and you have a little bit. But still, it's just amazing how you just adapt.
My face is always so gross and like my acne is all breaking out. It's nasty.
I know. I'm sorry. And it feels clammy. Fun with the pandemic. Okay, so a couple domestic issues. After the War of 1812, what's going on in the United States were a few things. So the U.S. came out of the war in worse shape, arguably, but they felt like they won. So back of spending, this still a time when the U.S. had to pay back its debts in gold, and remember bondholders, remember the Assumption Bill. But they did re-sign and make another Bank of the United States, a second national bank. Remember the Bank of the U.S. was a big issue that led to the first political parties, the Federalists and the Republicans. Well, President Madison, who opposed the bank, now signed a bill to bring the bank back. Because of the financial disaster, but write this down, only a 20-year charter. Only a 20-year charter. So 20 years, it will come back out. And this will be a huge issue in the 1830s. And they would print currency, tax revenues would come through it. And it's a private company under this man right here, Nicholas Biddle. And yes, doesn't Biddle look like at least his eyes are trying to make him look like a junior high age girl. So at that, and then a bill was passed called the bonus bill. It's a weird name for a bill, but using the terminology of the time, it said internal improvements. What are internal improvements? Roads. Today, have you heard the term infrastructure? That's a relatively new term in the last 50 years. Then they used to say in the 19th century, they would say internal improvements. The first half of the 20th century is a term I actually prefer. They would say public works. Today, infrastructure means the same thing. But there's a problem. Kentucky was already a state. Can the federal government build a road in a state? They could build a road in territories, but in a state. And this is going to be controversial for the rest of the century, and arguably through today. Madison vetoed it. Madison actually was in favor of the road. He just thought the federal government couldn't do it. Now, this seems almost ridiculous to people today. The federal government spends hundreds of billions of dollars every year on roads. Most of the money that goes to the major highways in Montana comes from the federal government, taxpayers. So the entire tax revenues from all the people in the U.S. help fund the roads, and Montana really benefits from this because Montana's huge, and no one lives here. So we have lots of roads. And yes, we could argue the roads are a little bit shaky, not always the best roads, but it is pretty remarkable, the highway system. All that had been created since about 1920, which, if you think about it, that's not that long ago. But so this was a big deal. We'll come back to this argument, but this already, I'm trying to point out that there's all these fights about what the federal government can do, what the states can do that exist to this day. So in 1816, this would begin what we arguably, they call arguable correctness, the era of good feelings. And the era of good feelings was that James Monroe would be elected for 2 straight terms with overwhelming victories in 1816 and in 1820, almost unanimous. The Federalist Party disappeared. And what this meant is there's only one political party, the Republican Party. And I repeat, you'll see in textbooks something they almost never call themselves Democratic Republicans. They didn't call them that because they called themselves Republicans. But they call them Democratic Republicans later on because they will evolve into the Democratic Party, and then they'll kind of evolve back into the Republican Party to differentiate them from future parties. But everybody then called them Republicans. One political party, the Federalists, died. Now, it implies that, oh, this is finally the Madisonian idea that everybody is friends and we're all going to get together. Not at all. What it just meant is all the bitter disagreements are so wrapped up in the party. And they'll come out in 1820 in near Civil War. Just 5 years after this, we won and we're Americans. And will blow up into 2 political parties, the Democracy, which will become the Democratic Party of today, and the Whigs. By the way, Monroe was born in Fredericksburg, Virginia. George Washington was born in Fredericksburg, Virginia. They did this on purpose. Doesn't he kind of look like George Washington? And one more thing about this. He's from Virginia. Washington, Jefferson, Monroe, Madison, all from Virginia. And Jefferson was Washington's Secretary of State. Madison was Jefferson's Secretary of State. Monroe was Madison's Secretary of State. You see a trend here. Virginians were Secretaries of State. And you'll notice also no popular vote. But things will begin to change. In a little over a decade, more and more states will allow the people to pick the electors, thus giving our vision of democracy that weird thing we have today, which it is kind of weird. So, a very important court case will come during this time. Another one of these by, everybody write down the Marshall Court. I didn't put that stuff. Write down the Marshall Court. That court that did Margaret versus Madison and Fletcher versus Penn. It's called McColloch versus Maryland. And Maryland tried to tax this new national bank, And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't tax the bank. Congress has implied powers to make things like a bank. And this would greatly, not so much increase the power of the federal government, but give credibility to the increase of the power of the federal government. Congress has these implied powers under the necessary and proper clause. This is the reading of the Constitution, but to this day, it is still undefined. How far does that power go? And don't forget, whomever's in power will want more power for the national government. Who's ever out of power will want less power. And it will reverse as soon as the different groups in power. Trust me, right now Republicans are very happy with how much power President Trump is wielding through executive orders, especially getting rid of things like environmental regulations. They're just overjoyed. But as soon as, let's say, Biden is elected, Republicans will be complaining about the Democrats' power overreach. And it was vice versa. I guarantee it. It's always like that. If you look for consistency in politics, you're looking in the wrong place. Oh, one more thing. If you're worried about anybody being punished for being hypocritical, wow, are you looking in the wrong place. Politicians, by definition, are hypocritical. Could we expect better? Probably, but that's not the world we have right now. So in 1918, meaning 1818, in 1918, they looked at the 100-year anniversary of the Convention of 1818. How's that? How's that for a recovery? This is supposed to be Britain. I guess I got tired. Britain and the United States met in the convention only 3 years after the Treaty of Ghent, 4 years after the Treaty of Ghent. And they finally decided on a few issues about the Great Lakes, but most importantly, to the greatest impact of us right here, they settled on the 49th parallel as the border of Britain and the United States. Well, British Canada and the US. If you look at this map over here, this area in orange, you notice how it wasn't clear. They just followed the drainage of the Missouri. So this part was British territory, technically, along the Red River, and up here, they just tilled the continental divide. So that's why the border is here. This lake was, they kind of left it open for lots of reasons, Lake of the Woods. This is still claimed by Britain, Spain, the United States, Russia, and the people who live there. So this means that the US and Britain were actually becoming closer together. And ironically, partially because of the United States was becoming a more important economic power. Ironically, oh, and then in 1919, John Quincy Adams, Monroe's Secretary of State, John Adams's son. This would be a treaty with, I forgot to write this down, Spain, US and Spain. And the US got Florida. Militia and the US Army under Andrew Jackson actually invaded Florida. Florida had become a place for runaway slaves to hide, especially with tribes like the Seminoles. And so Jackson, a slaveholder, just did it. Yeah. Remember Jackson, I said it's complex? This is what we call a complex, meaning immoral. But it kind of set the border right here between the border of Texas too, kind of clarified this. But the US got Florida. And Spain didn't want it anymore. In fact, Florida had no real value. It turned out to not have as many resources as they wanted. It's just basically swamp and gators. What would make Florida would be air conditioning. Literally, just air conditioning. And now Florida is just, it's Florida. I don't even know what else to call it. And you know, every crazy crime or every crazy person, your first instinct is they must be from Florida. Right? Whenever you see, oh, there's somebody doing something really stupid on video. What part of Florida are they from? Sorry, Florida. I'm not that sorry. So with that, the United States was just beginning the Industrial Revolution. And, oh, this is working. Just give me a sec. Camera keeps turning. I don't know if I turn it. So, that is an industrial town. This is actually Harper's Ferry, Virginia, using water power. But the first ever in American history happened just as the Industrial Revolution began. Oh, let's go right to this. The Panic of 1819. The Panic of 1819 was an economic catastrophe that hit the US, and this is a panic, it's called a financial panic, where banks weren't getting their money back, banks shut their doors. I'll explain more how these work later on. But the point is, the Industrial Revolution began and the first economic catastrophe hit. Now, it only affected a small area. Most people were still farmers, not involved in this new thing called capitalism, but it showed that something that's going to be endemic in this new system. Booming economic times and bust. It would be called the boom-bust cycle. And when this happened, it coincided with Henry Clay. Henry Clay, who was a Republican, soon to be called the Whig and known history down the road as the Great Compromiser, he proposed something called the American system. And I put trains in there because trains are going to be part of this down the road. And the United States is going to debate the American system. This is what he called his program. For 40 years. And then after, they're still going to debate it, they just won't call it the American system anymore. Long after he's dead. And it was basically this, a protective tariff. There was no protective tariff. There would actually be an increase in tariff to raise taxes on foreign competition, on imports in 1816. A strong bust, a Bank of the United States, which also happened in 1816, and he wanted internal improvements. And the best example of that time was funding for that national road, but the bonus bill was vetoed. And why I put this down? The big internal improvements that government expects will be about railroads. I love this picture of one of the first railroads. Tariff, bust, internal improvements. And this will come back for years. American system, American system. So when the new political party called the Whigs will be developed, they'll push for the American system, American system. And this will be a national economic program. We'll talk about the implications, but it's going to be debated for year after year after year. And then, it nearly blew up. In 1820, a fight over slavery will come out as the Missouri Compromise in 1820. Why did I put later? Because this is not what I'm going to talk about. I just want to put it in here to show that the era of good feelings, where there's only one political party, no, actually it's much more complex. We have fight over bonus bills, fight over the bank, fight over the American system, and a fight over slavery. 5 years after the War of 1812 ended, it fell apart. 5 years. Lastly, the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, there was a series of revolutions, actually it's in 1820 and 21, but the US would pass it in 1823, well, Monroe would issue. There was a series of revolutions all over South America and New Spain, and Brazil from Portugal. They all revolted and got their independence from Spain. Mexico became independent all the way down to Argentina. And Brazil won their independence from Portugal. And the US was really worried that, and Britain was too, that places like France trying to recover after the Napoleonic era by coming and scoop out colonies. The US wanted to have dominance over this trade. This would be a cartoon called about the Monroe Doctrine at the end of the century. So what it said was, no European intervention in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, if you already have a colony like Britain has Canada, or British Honduras, which has become Belize, or even Spanish Cuba, fine. But no more additional intervention, meaning that no colonies can be created by European countries. Britain originally was going to sign, but they couldn't come up with an agreement. Now, the US had no power to enforce this. This was just simply a document sent out by Monroe saying that the US doesn't want this. The US does not have the power to enforce this. But ironically, who does? Oh, by the way, here's Monroe, like with the globe, saying this will be American protected.
So why did they want to protect those little colonies?
If they remain independent countries, well, first off, the idea is the US was worried about if France comes in, or Spain, or another country comes in, the United States might not be able to expand further westward. Okay. But the other reason is small, relatively weak economies will be easier for Britain and the US to exploit them economically. They come in and make deals with them that will benefit them. Economic imperialism. Ironically, Britain enforced it. Britain made it their policy to keep out other countries. And so there would be a few efforts by other most countries to move in here. The best known would be France trying to take Mexico in the 1860s. Have you heard of Cinco de Mayo? That's about that. But never happened. Now the thing about this is, by 1850, virtually everybody had forgotten about the Mongol War. Everyone forgot about it. So write this down. This will become an issue at the turn of the century, 1900. This will become an issue in 1900, where the US, now a great power, will say, hey, and this is our hemisphere. We own it. It'll be called big stick diplomacy. We'll get to it. It'll be dusted off. Like, oh, remember this? And that's what this cartoon is about. New heading, big letters, the Industrial Revolution. In fact, wait, don't write that yet. Write down big letters, new unit. Is that the end of the last unit? I know we had the test. I wanted to get the test done last week so we get on the order. But write down the American system. Because we're going to create, this is going to be called the American system. And so this is a new unit. November 3rd, the American system. And what do I mean by that? The American economic system, much of its cultural system, and the political system. This will be the birth of American democracy. And I want to be clear, this wasn't given to people. It's because people demanded economic rights. Now, political rights. Let's be clear about it, though. We're talking about white men. So a lot of people are going to have to fight hard for other rights, but it's a big step. But the Industrial Revolution will be the key to all this. I mean, look at this wheel. Look at that wheel. You can't just make this up. I'm still trying to figure out what he's doing here. I think they're trying to get a scope of this wheel for a steam engine this is probably for a boat. Stand and sit there. And by the way, you notice too, it's a camera. So many that we take for granted in society will come out of the Industrial Revolution. So many of the good and bad things are going to come out of this. If they would have dropped any of us in 1800, we would just say, hey, you're in America now. Drop us in Philadelphia in 1800. All of us would curl up in the fetal position and cry. Because the world would make no sense to us in any way. Not even how people made a living. It's even how they thought about making a living and thought about life would have made no sense. If you would have dropped this in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War, the world would make sense. Okay, it'd still be really difficult, weird, but it would start to make sense. If you would have dropped this in 1900, it's all over. Okay, there wouldn't have been like computers, those kind of things, but there's electricity. The world would have made sense to us. It would be hard. It would make sense. The world will dramatically change. And so literally a new world and a way of thought will be created. There's few things in the world that compared to the Industrial Revolution.
Was the U.S. the first country to get the Industrial Revolution?
That's a great question. So everyone write down the factors of the Industrial Revolution, because you just got to factor number one. Did we talk about this in advance? Did we plan this? This is well planned. See, this is the kind of thing you just can't make up. Factors of the industrial growth, and where did it begin? Britain. It began in Britain in the second half of the 18th century. So around 1660, 1670, we'll talk about it more, but textiles. And so this is a picture, this is one of my famous artists. I have many famous artists under mine. One of my favorite artists, Claude Monet. And I like the Impressionists. You can't really, you get a flat picture on the screen. It doesn't really do any justice. But the way they use colors, this kind of art would be a reaction to photographs. Photographs. Why would you make a picture just to copy something else? So they try to give the artist's vision of what it looks like. But that's London Bridge, and it's showing how industrial London, see the smokestacks, and they're really good painting. I'm a big fan of the Fresh Air Start. But London Bridge, it's not there anymore. If you go to London, and London Bridge is this ugly, relatively modern bridge. The old London Bridge is gone. They tore it down in the 20th century because couldn't get boats through it and wanted to have more traffic. Anybody know what happened to it? They removed it brick by brick, and this millionaire in the United States purchased it. And now it is in Lake Havasu, Arizona. London Bridge. It just kind of goes, it's just kind of over like a irrigation canal in Lake Havasu, and it's really kind of weird, this old bridge. Has anyone been to Lake Havasu? It's some of these lakes created from the dams along the Colorado River. The only reason there's Phoenix is because they sucked all the water out of the Colorado. And the Lake Havasu is an example of that. It's really kind of fun. If you see that Tower Bridge, that big bridge in London, everyone thinks, they think that's London Bridge, that's Tower Bridge. So, number two, as we mentioned before, the War of 1812. Industrial Revolution, Transportation Revolution came out of this. And I showed this because these are British ships of the line. The British blockade kept British goods out, and that would trigger U.S. starting to make these goods. U.S. manufacturers. So War of 1812. But then three, the biggie. The Transportation Revolution that also came out of the Industrial Revolution. And here's a big American 10-wheeled steam engine. I just thought this was kind of an interesting picture, racing a horse. But the Transportation Revolution would literally change so much about society, so much about the way people felt about the rest of the world, how they got goods. And you can see from this map, generic, but it's rates of travel from New York City. Now, I mean getting goods, moving goods, not just somebody, you know, on horseback, you can go for limited stretches over 20, 30 miles an hour. I mean, heck, I could run at 25 to 30 miles an hour, right? Who's with me? You agree, right? Just agree. What was that received that DK Metcalf for the Seattle Seahawks last week ran down an interception return? Yeah. And he ran over 22 miles an hour. My God, I can't even. It's unreal. And he weighs like 240. Okay, moving on. So this one day to move goods. See that area red? One day to get how that goes. So to get over the mountains, get to Cincinnati is 3 weeks. And even then, it's really risky. It's better to take the longer route around from Cincinnati to New York or vice versa. So to get the point here, it takes forever to move goods. So in 1800, people had to be self-sufficient. You have to make your own stuff. It takes too long to get goods. And how can you ever have a factory? To have a factory, you got to move raw materials. If it takes so long to move raw materials, it makes no economic sense. It's too expensive to have a factory. By the way, Britain would have their own transportation revolution at the end of the 18th century, canals everywhere. And that would trigger Darwin. They discovered all these fossils, digging. But, so look, 5 to 6 weeks to get from a tiny little pier right here called Chicago, a dock on Lake Michigan, 5 to 6 weeks from Chicago to New York. So the first element of the transportation revolution were roads. But there weren't very many roads because to make a good road, I showed you that macadamization process, layer after layer of foundation and then crushed rocks. It took so long that we have like the national road here, and here would be some other roads, National Road, the Natchez Trace, here the Albany Road, a few other roads. It took so long and it's expensive to make roads that road building was relatively limited. Natchez Trace would be one of the more famous, and most of it was just a flat space like wagon routes. Most of the US highways would follow the old wagon running trails. So there's a highway that follows directly along the Natchez Trace, and the whole road from here is a national park. And it's one of those, most of it's fine, but it's really pretty. And there's a few of the mound builders, the tribes before along the way. If you ever get a chance, It's really cool. It's one of those things if you're, it rains a lot here, so it's pretty. But along Pennsylvania, some private companies built a road called a turnpike. What is a turnpike? They collect tolls. But the problem is they just don't make enough money. The turnpikes never really made enough money, even though Pennsylvania will be famous for their turnpike. The interstate highway, I-80, Interstate 80 that runs through Pennsylvania from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh into Ohio, is still a toll road. So that's how they collect tolls, but it comes from this legacy. And this is a bridge. I drove that turnpike, and so you get off or on, you got to pay it. This was 8 years ago. I think it was anywhere from $1.50 to $3 or $4. But I went off the road because this was the first bridge built on the old turnpike, and they had a toll to go over this bridge. And this stone bridge is still there. So I took a picture of that. I drove off and took a picture and went back on. And the bell rang. I'll explain this. Kind of stole the wagon. So tomorrow, be ready for either one of these. I might finish this. I might do a little bit. I'll watch a little bit on Andrew Jackson. We'll decide.
Or we could just all watch the election all night and then sleep all day tomorrow.
I know, we could. But that would be irresponsible. And we are nothing but responsible here, right?
Amen.
All right. So just check online tomorrow, and then I'll see you in person next week. No questions from the peanut gallery? All right, goodbye.